So Mario, you're basically hand building guitar amps, right?
Yes,
Mostly your
that's
own designs,
mhm.
if not fully your own designs.
No, it's yeah. I mean, in when it comes to guitar amps, who has a completely new and own
Yeah.
design? So to a certain degree, you always have some genes of some other amps inside. For the first amps I did, the genes were pretty unique because they were based on old European hi-fi amps. So that's something I did, yeah, during COVID just to entertain myself because we all knew we were going into a lockdown. We'll have a lot of time to spend at home. And I was like, how can I entertain myself? And I was like, yeah, I've seen a lot of Fenders, I've seen a lot of Marshalls, I've seen a lot of Foxes. What else is out there? And so I said, was like, let's have a look in some old European tube amps and modify them for being guitar amps and see how they do and learn about the circuits. And so I started buying old racks from eBay, like for 100 euros or something. And some of them were, yeah, okay. Some of them were pretty good. And some were like, oh, wow, that's a guitar sound I didn't hear before from another amp. And those were basically the blueprints for my first amps. And of course, I modified the circuit because originally they were not built for guitar. So you sometimes had to add a different input stage or deal with impedances and stuff like that. But that's how the first Tube Workshop amps came up.
That is so cool, though. Um, but like the question that I wanted to ask, which you kind of answered, but I want to dig deeper because I'm a lover of guitar amps as well. I'm a lover of all things guitar, really. Um, in the world where everything has to be digital of some sorts and modeled and have some interface or whatever, how do you feel about building truly analog devices that modifies ins and outs but in a truly analog way?
How do I feel? I feel good doing it because I mean, that's the beauty of our modern days. We can have all the digital stuff. We can have like 500 amp models in a small box and carry them around with us. But we can also have the real deal. And I always say, if there were no tube amp builders anymore, what would you model tomorrow? So for a working musician, the digital modeling stuff is often a really great tool for touring and always having the same sounds and stuff like that. But most of the guitar players I know, so if you let them play through a real plexi in a room and a model of a plexi in a modeler, they will always prefer the amp in the real room because I know it's not practical for modern days, but moving the air, having the volume, be sitting in front of a speaker is simply a different experience than playing a modular through Ineos. It's simply like that.
It's a completely different word,
Yeah.
literally.
I, I will not say better or worse, but it's just a different experience that you cannot fully recreate with modelers.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I'm absolutely 100% with you. But going deeper into your stuff, because I'm literally looking at the website right now. You have a rather you found yourself a rather specific niche in amplifiers because you're building either class IB or class A amps, mostly
Mhm.
running as clean amplifiers. Why?
That's true for my first two amps that I put out, the 2864S and Single Six, which were basically designed as clean platforms for pedal boards, especially the Single Six. The Single Six with a, I mean, that is where the name comes from. It's a single-ended amp with one 6L6 tube doing 6 watts. So Single Six. And the idea behind that was, okay, these days everyone is making the sounds with a pedal board, and I want to have an amp that has a really unique and sweet clean tone. Therefore, also the Class A design fits in very well. And I wanted it to have a really adult sound, but in a bedroom compatible wattage. Because you know what normally happens when manufacturers scale down wattage, they also scale down the housing and the speaker because they always think, oh, low wattage amp, that's a practice amp. And I didn't think like that. I wanted a full blown adult sounding amp, but not that loud. And this was the concept behind the Single Six, which actually was based on a PA amp from a French railway station that was used to make announcements in a railway station.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but that at the end of the day explained why the amp was how it is and has that certain sound because first I didn't understand the concept of the original amp. It was a Bouyer amp because it had a 6L6. It had a completely overblown power supply with like serial capacitors. Really, the running the 6L6 has a really low voltage, not coming near to what this tube is able to do. It was all built around running it safely for a long time. And then at a certain point, it came to me, okay, they used it for making an announcement in a railway station. So there was no technician around. And it was probably running 24/7 and it had to be bulletproof. And this is why the concept of that amp is like that. But that gave the amp a really special sound because normally you would never run a 6L6 at such a low voltage, but it gives it a certain sound.
Okay. That is like I was reading about you before, but that's even more interesting. So whenever you like, if you would have to design a new amp right now, would you rather like start designing from scratch and figure out stuff as you go, or are you looking for some specific inspiration, as you've mentioned with the hi-fi amps, with the Bouyer stuff? What's your process?
I always start from having a certain sound in my head. It's not like I'm coming from the schematic side of things so that I think, oh, let's do something that is similar to a old bassman or something. I always have a sound in my head. For example, for that amp,
Yeah.
that was originally based on a custom build I did for a customer in Budapest. And he came to me just telling, Mario, I'm a really old school LA metal guy. Can you build an amp for me? And so, of course, LA metal sound in the 80s was all hot rodded plexis by guys like Jose Arredondo and so on. But I didn't start off in trying to find schematics of what Jose did. I just chatted with my customer, what are the recordings you like? And so I was listening to a lot of music from the time. And this is how the blueprint of the sound I wanted to have came to my mind. And then I started looking, okay, what could be the right basics, circuitry, which mods that have been out there do I like, and which one do I not like. And normally I always don't fully copy mods because there's always something I don't like with them or the original schematic. And I say, no, let's do that different. I don't like that. But at the end of the day, it's then like doing a bit of a jigsaw puzzle until the amp that is on my workbench is sounding like what I hear in my head.
So also, but on the Kali Sunsets, which is right behind you right now,
Yeah, normally it's red. That's a custom built in black.
which I would have to say, like this color scheme is working really well for me as well. But it's an 18-watt amp, and there's that mythical, massive discussion everywhere about headroom.
Yeah.
Where is your stance on headroom on low to mid wattage amps?
If you want a really, really clean sound, so if you're playing big halls doing funk music, then headroom is everything for you. As soon as you go more into a higher gain range, then actually most of the distortion comes out of the preamp and phase inverter. And you just want the power amp to be clean and stable and bring it to the volume you want. I understand that in like certain metal genres like black metal and so on, with all the baritone and downtuned guitars, they also need some headroom just to have a stable bass response. But for higher gain amps, where most of the distortion comes not out of the power amps, you're really free in scaling it to what fits best to you. And I mean, you have like 100-watt heads behind you. You know how loud they are.
Yeah.
You will, these days, unless you play Madison Square Garden, you will never be able to crank them.
Yep.
And this is why I chose to go into that 18-watt format, because it's nice to bring the power amp to a level not where it distorts, but where it starts pumping a little bit and compressing a little bit. And with an 18-watt amp, you can do that at a volume that is still bearable for normal persons. You will not be able to do that with a 100-watt head. So for me, it was simply like, I want that hot-rodded Plexi 80s metal sound, but who needs the 100 watts? I just didn't understand. And I mean, this thing is, it's really, because the really big headroom, normally you only need when you need to be clean. And that is not an amp that is meant to be clean. I mean, even with the old Plexis, I did that exercise with Henning Pauli some time ago. So he had, for doing a review, one of the new Marshall Modifieds, the 1959 SLP. And he had a problem, so I looked after it, and that amp tells 100 watts, yeah? So actually clean, it was already like 120 watts. But if you cranked it, so if you do with it what you're intended to do with a Plexi, to have everything on 10, so you don't have a clean output signal anymore, you don't have a sine wave, you have more like a rectangle, then this amp puts out 180 watts.
Jesus Christ. That's absolutely mad. Oh my God.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely crazy. Like, I'm on the side of the fence where I like high wattage amps, mostly because of the stuff you said. I was never much into AC/DC kind of voicing of Marshalls, where the power amp is really cranked and it gets that into pumping stuff. So hence the question about the headroom. But also, doing a nice segue into the Lully signature that you have, which I think was the first amp I saw from Tube Workshop somewhere on YouTube. And it was more interesting to me to find out that you're not building high gain amps. It's more of a pedal platform. It's more of a classic construction. So how did you end up having all of that and the hi-fi amps and then Lully's signature, which is completely off the beaten path for you?
Oh, that's also a completely different story with the Lully signature. But yeah, let's start off with the pedal platform amps. This is how I started off. I never was dogmatic in Tube Workshop is just doing one thing and nothing else. But this is how I started, because you have to start somewhere. And when founding my company, I didn't want to enter the market with, hey, I'm another guy that does a really great spin on a deluxe reverb. Yay. Nothing against deluxe reverbs. I love them, but I wanted to start with something different that is also kind of unique. And during COVID, I dig really deep into that old European amp thing that is obviously never high gain. It's always a pedal platform. And the single six and the 286 I made out of it had a really unique sound. And I thought, like, that's actually a really nice story, A. And B, those amps actually have a sound that is not really comparable to your standard Marshalls, your standard Foxes. Yeah, the Foxes little bit, that's also a different story, or the Marshalls and so on, which was good and bad for me at the beginning, I have to say, because half of the people loved it and said, well, finally there's a guy that is offering something different to us than the standard Marshalls and Fenders. But the other half of the people were like, I don't know, is it a Vox? Is it a Marshall? Is it a Fender? And I was, no, it's nothing other. I'm confused. So they just like were, because that's what they know, and that's the like how they think. There's the Fox sound, there's the Marshall sound, there's the Fender sound. And I was like, hey, it's an old European tube amp. And they were just like, I don't know what to do with this thing. But yeah, that's how I started, because you have to start somewhere, and I'm a small company, so I cannot start with having like 5 amps at once. So I started with that kind of unique thing, I would say, and then build up from that, opening up to like tube bass amps, and then also like the Lulis and this one, which yeah, kind of happened by accident. So when talking about Lulis, actually Uwe Lulis visited my booth on my very first year of Guitar Summit, which was 2022 or 2023, I'm not sure. He came to my booth and hey, I'm Uwe. Perhaps you've heard of the band Accept, and I was like, yeah, I know Accept, and I know Gravedigger, and and he was like, well, I'm looking for somebody that is helping me on finalizing my own signature amp. So because the story behind that is he was working together with Niels Thompson from Tube Thompson, amp builder from Hamburg in Germany. Don't know if you ever heard of him. He did stuff for Scorpions.
I know about him.
Yeah. And so Uwe was working with him on his signature amp, and then sad story, totally unexpected, overnight, Niels Thompson died. So Uwe was sitting there with this prototype, having no schematics, no nothing, and he was looking for somebody, to finalize that amp and bring it on the market with him. And so some time passed by because he was on tour, and then he came back to me and said like, "Hey, can we pick that up?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, but you will probably have to give that amp to me for a couple of weeks because I have to trace it and see what it is and everything." So he visited my workshop because he's just like 1.5 hours away, and he brought the amp, and we tested it and we talked about it, and he told me what the sound he is after is like an old JCM 800 with a Boss OD1 pedal in front of it as boost. That's his trademark sound, and it really is. And when he was already leaving my workshop, he saw an amp chassis sitting in my shelf with dust on it and everything, because that was a prototype I already built like 8 years before, so long before Tube Workshop existed. Actually, it's sitting over there. I can show it to you if you want.
Yes, yes.
So that
Okay.
was what was sitting in my shelf, and perhaps we can see it on camera.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
There's already switches on it telling JCM and JTM, like on the Lulis amp. And so he saw that, and he was like, "Oh wow, that is cool. JCM 800. That was always my sound. Can I try that?" And I was like, "I don't even know if it still works." Yeah, so we powered it up. It still worked, and that was already the concept of like the Cali Sunset with the 18 watt. This was a preamp that you could switch between a JTM 45 and a JCM 800 with an 18-watt power amp. And I did that like years ago. And so he tested it and he said, "Oh, wow, that's awesome. I want one." And I was like, "Yeah, I can build one for you. That's no problem. But now let's focus on your signature amp." And so I traced his amp and everything. And then a couple of weeks later, I brought it back to his studio. And then I also put that prototype in a head shell and brought it to his studio and told him, "You like that, so you can have it in your studio playing with it just until your signature amp is finished." And so from then, over several months, we more and more moved away from his original signature amp in making his signature amp out of that prototype.
Okay.
Of course, we did like a 50-watt power amp. I needed an effects loop. We had to integrate a Boss OD1 circuit because that is really part of his sound. So when we played around also with that prototype, then he brought his old Gravedigger OD1 pedal and we put it in front of the amp. And he said, "Well, level is always on 10, and then the overdrive in the first half." So using it as a booster, and we put that in front of the prototype, switched it on, and there was the Gravedigger sound from the old albums. It was like, okay, that's the sound. There it is. And so we didn't start messing around with, "Oh, let's try to emulate that with a tube stage." We were like, "Okay, let's just get a OD1-ish circuit inside the amp." And this is when you on the Lulis activate the overdrive that has just the overdrive knob, which is like first half of the overdrive on an OD1 pedal, and volume is always up. It's it's like having that in front of the amp, but it's integrated in the amp because it's just such a elementary part of his sound. And so this is how the Lulis happened.
That is amazing.
And
Like I'm even more happy about this. I think happiness is the right word because I'm from the part of the guitar players like you can't see it, but And there's like 7 or 8 more where I believe every single amp has to have some sort of the boost in front of it. Doesn't matter if that's a TS circuit or a fuzz, or another TS circuit or a clone, whatever. So I'm always happy to see that there's, the way I think kind of moves into all the ways, which is super fun. But as I have to land this plane, sadly, because it's absolutely amazing talking to you about the nerdy stuff. If you would have to, like, let's say money is not an object, so you can do whatever you please. You can do literally whatever you like. What would be the amp that you would build? Time is not of an essence. Money is not of an essence. You can build whatever you want, whatever you please.
For me personally?
Yes.
Or I mean, for me personally, honestly, already the 2864S amp I built is pretty close to what is one of my all-time favorite sounds because I like the sound I love when playing guitars, and I'm always more the single coil guy than the humbucker guys. I love Strats and Telecasters. And for me, like a really sparkly, clean sound, and sparkly means a lot of treble, open top end, but not annoying. Like, on a Fender, you crank the treble and it's like, dental drill. So wide open top end, but not annoying. And then bringing that into a slight overdrive, so you get that slight crunch like you hear on like many early Bryan Adams recordings, for example. That was always kind of my dream sound. And actually, at the end of the day, because when I was designing the 2864S, that was before Tube Workshop existed. So I didn't design this amp for Tube Workshop. Actually, I made this amp and then I decided it's good enough to found the company.
Okay.
Because what finally turned out to me, but I didn't know it at that time, I just found out like 2 years ago. I was always a big Fox AC30 fan, right? Because I had a certain sound in my head that I was thinking like, this is the AC30 sound, which is exactly what I described. Chimey, wide open, not annoying, really great edge of breakup sound. And I had like 4 or 5 different Foxes from the end of 60s, early 70s, and they never had that sound for some reason. And then at a certain time, I kind of gave up and I was like, yeah, probably I was misconcepting the Vox sound, and AC30 just doesn't sound like that. And so then during COVID, I worked on that Philips Hi-Fi amp, and I immediately noticed that has this open top amp that I love so much. And so I tweaked that amp to be like, that's my dream guitar sound, sparkly top end, great edge of breakup. Probably doesn't sound like a Vox, but hey, that's my dream sound. And only like when I got my old 1962 Fox AC30 normal, not no top boost, normal, 2 years ago, I restored that and I first tried it and I was like, wait a minute, I know that some sound from somewhere. And turns out my 2864S amp doesn't sound exactly like the Fox, but they have a lot of similarities. And that Fox sounds different than all the other Foxes I had before. So in retrospect, without knowing it, I think with the 2864S, I was kind of designing my extreme Fox sound that I never found in a real amp, but that I was hearing in my head. And so this is how the 2864S happened. I can also show you the original Philips amp.
Yes, hit me, hit me.
That was the original Philips amp.
Is that the one you have on your website, the photo of?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's the one.
This is built like a tank.
Yeah, actually it is. It must be from the end of the 40s. And yeah, it had inputs like gramophone and yeah. I mean, at those times the term hi-fi actually wasn't existing, right? It was just a tube amp.
That like
Yeah,
nobody
but
cared.
that was the one yeah, there was no
Yeah.
hi-fi. There was just like making noise.
That is super cool. That is absolutely super cool. And I'm gonna pause it right now.